Out in the backcountry, most disappearances don't begin with panic. They start with a small decision, a shortcut, a missed marker, and a place so wide and quiet that by the time anyone notices, the trail has already gone still. I was 58 that summer, retired from county roads and working a seasonal post at a backcountry contact cabin on the north side of the Wind River Range in Wyoming, the kind of place where your day was usually the same in the best possible way. Unlock the shutters, note the overnight low from the little weather box nailed to the porch rail, switch the radio from charger to live, check the permit board, sweep the dust and dead morphs out from under the map table. Then wait for people who are always either underprepared or too confident. The cabin sat where an old service road ended and the trail system really began, with a stock gate to the east, a creek crossing a quarter-mile downslope, and a string of campsites beyond that, where through hikers sometimes spent a final easy night before heading higher. It was dry that week, all that pale August dust sitting loose on the road in the rabbit brush, and by noon everything looked a little faded around the edges from heat shimmer, except the dark timber farther up. We were short-staffed, same as everybody else, so most afternoons I was alone after the trail crew checked in and rolled back toward district. My job was simple enough: issue permits, update closure notes, remind people about food storage and afternoon storms even when there weren't any, log plate numbers when somebody gave me a bad feeling, and answer the same map questions over and over from folks who treated contour lines like decoration. Around 1 o'clock, 3 hikers came in together. Not as a group exactly, but close enough in timing that I noticed them as one little knot of movement at the board. 2 men and a woman, all somewhere in their 30s maybe, sun-faded clothes, day packs that were too light for the loop they said they were doing, and the particular rushed manner people get when they want information only long enough to ignore it. The woman did most of the talking. She asked where the lake cutoff was. I told her there wasn't an official cutoff, not one maintained, just an old climber use path that braided out in the trees and disappeared in deadfall after winter blowdown. One of the men smiled like he already knew better, and tapped a folded printout from some hiking forum. I remember that because the page was soft from being handled, and had a bright yellow highlighter line across a route name we didn't use on any official map. I showed them the proper trail junction on the board, and told them the unofficial path had caused problems twice in the last 3 years. Once with a sprained ankle and once with a search that burned half a day before the hikers wandered out on their own from the wrong drainage. The quieter man asked if there was a ranger cabin closer to the lake if they got turned around. There wasn't. There used to be a patrol shelter 6 miles north, but it had been decommissioned and the roof was half gone. He nodded at that in a way that made me think the question mattered more than the answer. Then he looked past me into the cabin, at the radio set, and the lockbox, and the shelves where we kept spare trail signs, like he was taking inventory. I logged their permit anyway because nothing they were doing was against the rules, not technically. Their names went in the day register with a planned one-night route, vehicle listed as a dark green Subaru at the trailhead lot, expected out the following afternoon. Before they left, the woman asked whether the creek crossing below camp ever rose enough to make people detour. I told her not in August unless a storm stalled over the basin. She glanced at the sky, though it was clear as scraped glass. That was the first thing that stayed with me later, that she kept asking about alternate ways around things before she ever reached them. The rest of the afternoon was ordinary enough to be forgettable. A father and teenage son came through asking about fishing restrictions. A pair of riders needed directions around a deadfall cluster. I replaced a warped closure notice on the board and walked down to the generator shed because it had been making that coughing knock it made whenever the fuel line had too much air in it. The shed sat 30 yards behind the cabin in a stand of 10, lodgepole, and while I was crouched there with the side panel open, I heard a vehicle ease onto the service road, stop, idle, then back up slowly. Not a tourist maneuver. More like somebody checking whether to come in. By the time I stood, wiped my hands and came around the corner, all I caught was a tan pickup moving away through the trees where the road bent out. No plate, no district decal, nothing hanging from the mirror. I put it in the log because that was the kind of place where one extra vehicle was worth writing down. Around 5, the wind shifted. It came down from the high country cooler, and carried that resin smell off the pines, and the jays that had been raising hell near the dumpsters just went quiet. I closed up the map board and did my evening radio check with the district repeater. Signal was weak but usable. Little bursts of static chewing the edges of every sentence. No issues reported on trail. No weather advisories. The 3 hikers didn't come back by dusk, which was normal for an overnight, and their Subaru remained where they'd left it. I slept in the small room off the main office with the transom cracked because the cabin held heat. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the generator cycling strangely, not failing, just catching and idling high for a few seconds like it had taken a load. That happened now and then if someone used the exterior outlet by the wash station, but nobody should have been there that late. I lay still and listened. No voices. No car door. Just the hum settling back into its usual rhythm, in a loose piece of tin on the shed roof clicking in the breeze. In the morning I found the outlet cover hanging open. It might have worked loose on its own, except there was fresh dust rubbed off the wall below it, in a shape about the size of a hand. I was looking at that when one of the horsepackers from the lower meadow came up and asked if I'd sent anybody to check campsites 3 and 4 overnight. I said no. He said he'd ridden past early and seen a beam moving through the trees, low and deliberate, not like campers walking around. He figured trail crew until he noticed there was no truck at the lower gate. We walked down together after I radioed district and got no answer the first 2 tries. Campsite 3 was empty. Campsite 4 had a cold fire ring, 1 enamel mug on a flat rock, and a square patch in the dirt where a tent had been, except no tent was there. No trash, no sleeping bags, no food hang, none of the usual careless leftovers. It looked less like somebody had packed up than like they had been interrupted by someone who knew exactly how long it takes to leave a place in a hurry. The mug still had coffee grit dried in the bottle. Near the edge of camp there were shoe prints from at least 4 people, but the ground was hard enough that nothing showed clean except at the damp margin near the creek. That was where I saw the off-trail movement. 2 sets went toward the main path. Another set, heavier tread, peeled away toward the timber where there was no reason to go unless you knew about the old use path or wanted not to be seen from the trail. We followed that only far enough to confirm it was recent. Branch tips were still sprung, needles knocked bright side down. About 80 yards in, tied to a broken limb at eye level, was a strip of yellow plastic survey tape. Not Forest Service tape. Ours was orange that season. This looked torn from something else, maybe caution ribbon, maybe contractor marking. It was the same sharp yellow as the highlighted line on that woman's printout, and that little coincidence bothered me more than it should have. District finally answered on the radio at 8:40 and told me, hold position, note everything, wait for law enforcement and the duty ranger, because we were now in missing persons territory. By then I'd already walked back to the lot to verify the Subaru was still there, and noticed a second thing that turned the whole day. There was a rectangle in the dust beside the driver's side where another vehicle had parked close during the night or early morning. You could see the fresh compression from larger tires, and one clean drip of something dark, maybe coolant, maybe old oil, soaking into the powdery road shoulder. A tan pickup would have fit there just fine. The search built out over the next day and a half in the usual way, methodical and expensive and exhausting. Helicopter for one window before weather moved in, ground teams on the maintained trail, then grid sweeps through the trees where the use path vanished into deadfall and granite benches. They found one trekking pole in a patch of willow, then a map fragment under a log with no blood, no sign of a fall, and no gear cache that made sense. The printout route was gone. So were the hikers. Their car keys were not in the Subaru, which suggested they'd kept them, but nothing in the vehicle indicated they planned to leave for long. A cooler with sandwich meat, one charging cable still plugged into the dash, and a motel receipt from Lander folded in the cup holder. There were no clear signs of struggle, which made some people lean toward voluntary departure or confusion in bad terrain, but that never sat right with me, because experienced or not, people who get lost leave a messy trail behind. They drop layers, double back, break pattern. These 3 had simply thinned out into the woods near a campsite and stopped behaving like hikers. On the second evening, after most of the first search push had moved upslope, I was told to shut the cabin and relocate to district housing for the night. in case family started arriving at the trailhead. I went in to collect my logbook, and that's when I saw the permit register lying open on the counter. I knew I had closed it before going outside because I kept the pencil tucked in the spine, and it was now set neatly across the page. The hiker's entry was still there, but a line had been drawn through the route description in pencil. Not hard, just one clean strike. And in the margin, beside the quieter man's name, someone had written, "Used South Fork Access," in small block letters. We didn't have a South Fork access from that trailhead. Not officially, not unofficially, not by any name locals used. I took the book straight to the deputy. He asked if I'd written it earlier and forgotten. I hadn't. The handwriting wasn't mine anyway. Too upright, too careful. They bagged the page, and I never heard that they matched it to anyone. Weeks later, after the search scaled down and the story had already gone thin in the papers, I drove back to the cabin to help winterize. Their Subaru had long since been towed, the permit board stripped, the place dead quiet under the first yellowing aspens. Down by the generator shed, half buried in the dust where summer had hardened into cold, I found a small brass zipper pull shaped like a pine tree. It matched the one on the woman's pack. I was almost sure of it, because she had fussed with that zipper while asking me about alternate routes. What bothered me wasn't that it was there. People drop things. What bothered me was where it was lying, directly beneath the exterior outlet, in a place I had swept clean the morning before they vanished. The year I worked winter contact out of a Forest Service boundary station above the Gila. I was 34, newly divorced, and still in the phase where I'd taken that assignment partly for money, and partly because I was tired of hearing refrigerators, neighbors, traffic, all the little reminders that other people had somewhere settled to be. The station wasn't much, just a cinder block office with a propane heater, a radio mast, a storage lean-to, and 2 bunk rooms for rotating staff. But from November through early spring, it was the only regular human presence on that stretch of road once the hunters cleared out. Most days I updated closure signs, checked snow depth at 3 marked points, logged vehicles heading toward the trail system, and answered questions from the handful of day hikers who thought the maps in their phones meant something in a canyon country dead zone. That December had been dry and cold, with brittle grass along the shoulders and frost staying in the shadowed cuts until noon. You could hear trucks coming a mile off on the washboard road, but on foot everything vanished fast out there. Sound got swallowed by cedar and rock, and after dark the canyons held cold like a cellar. I had been on duty alone for 4 days because the other seasonal had gone downstate for a family funeral, and the one thing I didn't love about that post was the radio window. Our base repeater was clean for about 10 minutes every hour and scratchy the rest of the time, so you learned to stack your routine around it. At 2 p.m. I got a visitor who never sat right with me. He came in wearing a county search and rescue jacket that looked almost right from a distance but wrong up close. Wrong stitching, wrong patch color, no name strip. And he moved with the kind of easy familiarity people use when they want you to assume they belong. He was maybe in his 40s, clean-shaven, average build, tan ball cap, and he held a clipboard with 1 sheet on it and no actual forms clipped behind. He asked whether I'd seen 3 hikers sign through that morning, 2 women and a younger guy, because he was helping the sheriff's office with a welfare check. I told him I hadn't had any sheriff's traffic and asked which trail. He glanced at the permit board before answering, which told me he was building the lie as he stood there. Lower box, he said. There was no winter access to lower box from my side because the bridge washout in October had closed that route, and the closure notice was directly behind him at eye level. I said that access was shut. He looked at the sign like he'd just noticed it, gave a little shrug, and changed it to, then probably Middle Fork. That wasn't a small mistake. Those trailheads had different drainages, and nobody doing a real welfare check would mix them up. I asked what names. He had. He smiled at me in a tired, friendly way and said dispatch hadn't given him names, just vehicle info, maybe a dark SUV. Then he asked whether the bunk room was occupied, not whether anyone else was on shift. whether the bunk room was occupied. I told him no and watched that answer register. He stayed another minute, making a show of checking his watch and tapping the blank paper on the clipboard, then said he'd circle back after contacting the road crew. He left in a white pickup with mud over the plate, not splashed naturally, either, packed on there thick and flat like it had been done by hand. I wrote down the time, the fake patch details, the truck, all of it, and tried county dispatch in the next clean radio window. They had no welfare check, no volunteer in my sector, and no white pickup assigned to anybody. While I was still on with them, an actual trio of hikers came in from the trailhead lot on foot, and for about 5 seconds I thought that was the end of it, just some weirdo fishing for information. But these weren't the people he was describing. They were 3 college-age guys from Tucson on a 2-night loop, all skinny legs and rental trekking poles, one of them carrying too much camera gear and the other 2 already annoyed with him for it. They'd signed in that morning while I was down at the gate clearing a fallen limb, so I'd missed them. But they were back now, because they wanted clarification on a side route marked on an older paper map they'd bought online. The route in question was an abandoned connector trail that used to cross a narrow side canyon before maintenance stopped and flash floods ate it down to fragments. I told them straight that if they stayed on the marked loop they'd be fine, cold but fine, and if they tried that connector in winter light they'd lose time, probably lose footing, and maybe lose the trail completely by the pour-off. The one with the camera asked if anybody ever still used it. I said hunters did sometimes, locals maybe, but not people who needed asking. Then the tallest one, the quietest of the 3, looked out the office window at the road and asked if the white truck parked down by the vault toilet belonged to me. It did not. From my desk you couldn't see that angle. I stepped outside, and there it was, pulled in where it had a clean line on both the station door and the lot entrance, engine off, nobody visible through the windshield because the light was hitting the glass hard. The same truck, same mud-caked rear plate. I walked halfway toward it and the driver pulled out before I got close enough to see him clearly. No hurry, which I found worse than if he'd sped. Just rolled forward and left like he had already gotten what he came for. I told the hikers to stick to the marked road, stay together, and be out by tomorrow evening and wanted daylight on the road. I gave them my call sign and the hour marks for clean radio attempts. One of them made a joke about the fake rescue guy, and another one said, "That's New Mexico for you," like you wanted to flatten the whole thing into local color. And I let it go, because you can't explain to young men in good weather how fast a place can stop being casual. At 4:30, the temperature dropped hard. You could feel it first in the doorway, where the cold found the gap under the threshold, and then outside. The shadows along the canyon wall turned blue, and stayed blue. I made one more walk around the station before dark, checked the fuel luck, checked the tool shed, checked the chain across the old maintenance spur behind the building. The chain was hanging open, not cut, just lifted off the post and set down carefully so it wouldn't clang. That spur hadn't been used in weeks, and led nowhere useful except a washed-out turnaround above the ravine. Tire marks went up it anyway, fresh, narrow tread with one outer lug chunk missing on the right rear. I knew that pattern later. At full dark the radio got ugly, static punching through every transmission. At 7, I heard what sounded like a call on my frequency from one of the hikers, maybe the tallest one, maybe not. It was broken into scraps by interference, but I caught wrong trail, and then light below us, and then nothing but a hiss. I answered until my throat hurt, and got no clean return. County couldn't launch anybody till first light without a stronger fix, and from where I sat, with the mast groaning in the wind and the propane heater clicking on and off, all I could do was document, listen, and wait out the night. That was the shift that changed the station for me, because the fear didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces. First the sound of gravel under tires, sometime after 9. Not at the front lot this time, but behind the station, where nobody drove unless they knew about that maintenance spur. Then one dim light moving across the frosted window over the sink. Not a flashlight beam searching wildly, more like somebody walking with a covered lamp or a light held low against their jacket. Then 3 taps on the rear steel door. Not pounding, just 3 patient knocks, I didn't answer. I cut the interior lamp instead and stood to the side of the file cabinet where I could see the back entrance through the office past her mirror. No handle movement, no voices. After maybe a minute, I heard what sounded like the metal permit box lid at the trailhead being opened and shut. I stayed put. It is one thing to have a suspicious person in daylight with roads open, and another to be one human body in a block building surrounded by dark public land. Around 10:15, County finally patched me through on the cleaner repeater, and said a deputy was headed my way from reserve but would take time. While I was on with them, headlights came across the front windows. I nearly said thank God before I realized the beams were too high and too close together for the deputy's SUV. They swept once across the station sign, cut out, then came on again, facing away. Whoever it was wanted me to know they were there and not there at the same time. I never saw the driver. The deputy arrived just after midnight and found the white pickup gone, fresh tire marks on the spur, and boot prints around the back door that tracked over my own from the earlier work around. He stayed till morning. At first light, we drove to the main loop trailhead and found the hiker's rented SUV untouched except for one thing. Somebody had folded in the driver's side mirror. It wasn't storm damage. No wind that night had been strong enough, and the passenger mirror was still out. A mean little detail, almost intimate. Search teams started up the marked loop while I handled station traffic and paperwork. By noon, they found the first clear sign that the three had left the trail, but not where you'd expect. About 2 miles in, at a junction with a closed equestrian bypass, someone had removed the small aluminum not maintained plate from the signpost and laid it flat in the dirt, arrow end pointing into the bypass, as if to make the route look sanctioned from a dead distance. My stomach dropped when they radioed that in, because that exact plate had been in the permit box the night before, when I heard the lid open and close. Somebody had physically taken a station sign, carried it uphill in the dark, and used it to steer people. Past that point, the search found scattered prints and one dropped lens cap from the camera kid's pack, then signs of quick descent into a side drainage nobody should have chosen after sunset. The canyon there narrows into shelves and brushy cuts, a miserable place to navigate in daylight, let alone cold. They eventually recovered one backpack wedged under juniper roots above a wash. No major damage, no animal interference, just left there with the side pocket unzipped and the map gone. The hikers themselves weren't found that day, or the next. One of them turned up late on day 3, walking out on a ranch road 15 miles south with dehydration, exposure, and a story he could barely keep straight. He said they had seen a light below the trail after dark and thought it might be the road or a patrol camp. He said there was a sign at the bypass and that one of his friends was sure it matched the route on their old map. He said they heard a vehicle somewhere it should not have been, and later found tracks near a pour-off, then split up briefly when one of them slipped and tempers got bad. That was all he gave. They held together. You never described a direct confrontation. He never explained the folded mirror or the fake SAR jacket, or how a station sign wound up miles from where I'd heard the permit box open. Search expanded again. One of the other 2 men was found alive a day later in a cedar pocket, weak and confused. The third was never located. Officially, it sat in that broad category people use when they have pieces but no sequence, disorientation, poor route choice, winter conditions, possible outside interference unconfirmed. I worked the station another month, then transferred. The last week before I left, I was boxing old permit records in the lean-to when I found the not maintained plate returned to a shelf behind the extra boundary markers. Same screw scratches, same bent corner, same red dirt in the bolt hole from where Search had photographed it on the trail. No one in district could explain who put it back. What made me seal the box and walk straight outside was the strip of masking tape stuck to the rear with handwriting on it. 4 words in black marker. Meat block letters just like labels on evidence bags. LOI, 3 hikers this time.